Hi, it's Dr. Bria here again. Today I want to talk to you about my own experience that I've had with working at Ryerson University. I've been an employee for about 20 years. I've been employed at Ryerson, so I have a long-standing history with the university, one that I very much enjoyed for several years. For a very long time, for well over a decade, I just absolutely have or thoroughly loved working at Ryerson. I started like around 2000. I was doing a couple of part-time contracts and I was sessionally teaching while I was going through school at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Medicine. And once I finished, I did that through my master's and my PhD, and then when I finally finished, like to the same year that I finished my second postdoc, I came to Ryerson in a limited term faculty position. And I worked under the leadership of Dr. Winston Isaac, who I absolutely adored working with and working for. And worked under his leadership for about 5 years. And like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed that. In the end of 2012 and beginning of 2013, a leadership change occurred and Dr. Jim Thiessen took over. And at that point, my situation in terms of my employment and my comfort level and everything changed entirely when Dr. Jim Thiessen took over. And systematically, during the year of 2013, I was on a tenure track, and I was moving into my second year of my tenure track, and Dr. Jim Thiessen took over as the chair of my faculty tenure committee. And as the chair of my faculty tenure committee, he was obviously instrumental in writing my letters for review of my tenure at each point or each year. I had a 3-year tenure, and in the first year I got a great review, great feedback, and then that was, I guess, when Winston was the chair, and then the second year was okay, and then the third year when I went up for my submission, the feedback from my letter was relatively okay, but I came to hear the backstory about it, and I had at that point a number of exchanges with Dr. Jim Thiessen where he indicated numerous times that my work was falling short, numerous times that I wasn't doing a sufficient amount, that I needed to do more, that I wanted to be strong or should be strong when I go before my tenure committee, and that I should take his advice that he provided to me repeatedly, which was to request from my union that I get extra time put on my tenure clock, and that this was definitely the right thing to do because it would guarantee me more years of employment. Of course, I was very concerned, so I was constantly going to my union. My union was constantly telling me that I was fine, that I can wrap up, that I can always, at the point of tenure, if they don't think that I meet the tenure requirements, that I can ask for, or they can move to direct for an extension at that point. But essentially, the message was ignore and continue. Well, thankfully, with much, let's put it this way, much delay, but not a significant time delay, and a lot of stress and aggravation, and really inconsistent feedback and aggressive feedback, I got past the first level, thankfully, because thankfully the committee was comprised of 3 members, and the other 2 members had some considerably more positive things to say. And once I got past that first level, I was fine. I ended up receiving tenure, obviously, because I'm an associate professor now as of 2015. So I got really excited when I jumped into my associate professor position. I was excited because on a tenure track, you have a lot of restrictions, and rightfully so. Your union wants you to put focus on the right things, and those are to work hard, do lots of research, improve your teaching, Definitely your scholarly output, and make sure your community service stays, up to par and actually grows. And so I thought, here's an opportunity for me to grow, for me to engage in extra teaching, because that's something I thoroughly enjoyed, and the loading of 2 and 2 didn't seem to give me sufficient opportunity to reach my students. I wanted to go back to teaching more courses, which, as a limited term faculty member before I was ever an associate or even on a tenure track, I was used to having a minimum load of 3 and 3. So I immediately moved to try to engage in the teaching load and experience that I had prior to going on a tenure track when I was under the leadership of Dr. Winston Isaac. And I got pushed back immediately. And I was told that I wasn't allowed to teach. And I repeatedly went to my union and I implored them to support me. And they'd say, look, all we can do is talk to Jim and hopefully he'll listen. And over the years, I kept going, and my union representative at the time started to get a little angry with me. He's like, I don't understand what is going on in your school. And it was a pretty aggressive exchange. I found it difficult, and even, let's put it this way, I wasn't as comfortable going anymore to my union representative. I was like, wow, he's getting mad at me, and I'm not even the one that's creating the problem. So, and it just got worse and worse. I was restricted from being able to teach. I was restricted from any director's positions that came up, because over the years we started to develop a master's, and then the director's position for the master's became available. Despite having considerable years of experience with the program and being involved in the development, that opportunity did not go to me. I definitely had far more years of service in the school, but nonetheless, that was not on Jim's radar in terms of the way that he wanted to move the graduate program forward. I have been restricted from academic coordination contracts, even though I have the most seniority there. I have been restricted from any graduate supervision in our Masters of Community Health. Although I helped create it, I'm not allowed in the school in any capacity. I'm not allowed to supervise students. I am not allowed to teach any courses. I'm not allowed to help in the development of any courses. My department, and in particularly under the leadership of the director, which is Dr. Jim Thiessen, they've entirely blocked me, to the point that they've gone and sought out faculty members from other department areas to be able to continue to restrict me from any opportunities in our graduate program, which I have to say has been a very difficult thing to digest. I have worked extremely hard. I've worked extremely hard long before I even joined Ryerson. I am a long-time sufferer of a chronic disease, Crohn's disease. I spent many of my early years, before and during my training, academic training, in the hospital, being tube fed, and back then you couldn't even get outpatient services. It was really important to me to impact the healthcare in a positive way, because when I was a patient, you had to stay in the hospital to get your care. And my care was life-preserving care and sustenance. I needed TPN, which is total parental nutrition. I had central lines, so they wouldn't let you out of the hospital for things like that. But let me tell you, back then I was absolutely headstrong on ensuring that I would get my PhD, that I would get my master's, that I would get my PhD, that I would finish school and become something. And I worked towards that goal all through that period. And then I got on my tenure track with the same vigor and excitement and determination and drive. And then when I finished and I encountered Dr. Jim Thiessen, I slowly saw that many of those facets that had grown so very strong started to be very subtly stripped from me, very subtly at first. And then they turned into real slaps in the face. I was or always supervised our practicum, even when I was on a tenure track. It's the capstone thesis in our program. And when Jim came on, he didn't like me doing the practicum. And despite the fact that we didn't have someone more qualified or capable, and so he almost immediately moved to have me take it off a practicum. And that was definitely a punch to the gut, not to say the least. All of these things have been absolutely stripping to my dignity and my self-esteem. And they've been difficult for me to digest, for sure. But I keep plugging on, for sure. I've been trying to plug on. I have been trying to get some support and some help from my university through a variety of different offices, which I'll speak to in a second. But taking me off practicum, that was really difficult, and I think Jim knew that, and I think that's why he went right for the gut. There was nothing else more he could take away from me because he'd taken everything else away from me. I'm basic things even, like I'm not allowed to speak at any of our functions. I'm not allowed to, or I haven't received absolutely any awards or recognitions for my stellar teaching contributions or supervision contributions. Like absolutely no recognition, absolutely no identification of anything that I've done or how steadfast I am in my commitment to my students, which, you know what, regardless of recognition, I'm going to do anyways. It's just that every single step of the way that I enjoy providing that kind of guidance and leadership, it's been stripped from me. And finally, in 2018, I started to vigorously seek out supports because I was so fed up. I mean, it was like 5-6 years and, same thing every single term. No teaching, no graduate opportunities. It was just ridiculous. I think I just finally, it hit a tipping point for me. So I went to our human rights office as a first step. Our human rights office did an extensive intake, and after their intake, they recapped, came back to me and said, look, it's obvious you've suffered from discrimination. We're just not sure what kind. So we're going to send you back to your human resources. So they sent me back to HR. I had already reached out to HR a few times. I'd send emails to them explaining, look, this is what I'm experiencing in my department. Please help. And I'd get absolutely no response. And then I still didn't get any response. So I circled back to my union, which had been a fruitless endeavor to that point, definitely. I had reached out to them, like I said, numerous times. And my union representatives would listen, and they would tell me, well, it's obvious Jim doesn't like you, and it's obviously, you don't get along, and statements like, well, soon enough he's going to retire. I think he's going to retire soon. So how much longer does he have as the director of the school? It seems like he's been there a long time. And I would tell them, and it was a very passive approach to getting the information, but absolutely no active sort of response, despite my clear and persistent engagement around the same types of blockages that I was receiving year on year on year, which I cannot tell you is absolutely exhausting. It's absolutely degrading. It's an absolute complete stripping and a manifestation of so much self-doubt about what you're capable of doing. Am I really that good at this? Or am I really, you start to think something's wrong with you because you're just not given absolutely any opportunity to grow or any kind of feedback that indicates you're doing the right things. So it's a tough blow. It's a really, really tough blow and a difficult pill to swallow, for sure. Like I said, got ignored But finally, like in 2018, when I went back to my union, they had hired, or let's put it this way, a new grievance officer joined their team. A new grievance officer that was racialized joined the union. And that grievance officer was assigned to me, or they put me in touch with him. To that point, I had only dealt with white people. I had dealt with 2 white people, the president of our union, and I guess Andre Foucault, and I'm not sure at the point in time what his title was, but he did a lot of things for our Ryerson Faculty Association. But both of them were white men. Both of them never once identified or called this racism, what I was experiencing, these excessive and forceful and intentional blockages from absolutely any kind of vertical movement in my department. And then all of a sudden, this racialized union representative comes on, and the first thing he says within, I don't know, like our first visit, Priya, this is discrimination, this is racism. And we're going to go to the Human Rights Office. I'm going to direct you to the Human Rights Office through the dean. We're going to flag an investigation and to look into this. And I went, oh my God, finally someone's listening. And he's like, well, I just need you to document everything that you've experienced since the beginning of time. So I had to go all the way back to the beginning, and I gave him all of my experiences that I could detail, using all of the information and resources that I had available to me, which were emails. Jim is very transparent about his racism, and he is comfortable documenting it. And discrimination based on disability as well too. I mean, frankly speaking, he pulled me into a room right after I got my tenure, and he said, I'm taking you off practicum because I don't think you can do it because of your disability. And I went, what do you mean you don't think I can do it because of my disability? I've never ever had a problem. I've never missed a practicum. I've never ever failed to perform adequately because of my Crohn's disease. It's never ever been an issue. And he said, well, maybe, but it could potentially pose one, because I'm thinking about just loading practicum to be a single professor responsibility. And I said, but you're not doing that right now. It's 2 professors, and I've never had an issue being able to do it. And he said, well, and I said, well, why don't you wait? And when you decide, then we can have this discussion again. And then he said to me, well, what if you got sick and it's a 1-person practicum? He just kept talking about it as if he had decided that it was going to be a 1-person practicum, even though it's never been a 1-person practicum. And he said, I really can't take that chance, Priya, that, you could fall sick, and then these students that have to finish their capstone can't finish because the professor's not able to complete practicum. And I said to him, you can't do this. You know that just recently we did ODA training, because I was so blindsided by the whole experience that I just immediately was like, there's rules about this, and that's the way I thought I was supposed to proceed. And he turns to me so comfortably and he says, well, maybe in theory I can't do those things, but in fact I really can, and I am, because I have to think about the school. And I was shocked, because I thought, for a split second, a very tiny part of me thought, maybe he's right, because the school is so important to me too. Maybe he's right, maybe it could threaten the school and the students, and that's always my number 1 priority. But then I was like, wait a minute, it's never been an issue. Anyways, I was able to walk away that day. Like I said, practicum was taken from me. And on many of these instances, one time come into his office, because he's called me into his office, and he's phoned me and he's emailed me, and then I come in and he accuses me, throws a manual at me, and he says, you have committed plagiarized. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he shows me this manual from practicum, one that I never created, and he knew I didn't create that manual. You knew, Jim, that I did not create that manual, but yet you proceeded to accuse me of plagiarism. And then you proceeded to tell me that if I changed the manual and removed any of these plagiarized elements and rewrote the stuff, that we would let this go. And I turned to you and said, but I didn't do it. I didn't do this repeatedly. And he says, well, you oversee the course, and that manual is used in your course. And he knew as well as I did that we never had any ability to change or modify any of the documents in practicum, that they were historically, let's put it this way, we inherited those documents and to use, and nobody touched anything, because in terms of the actual way the manual was written, preceded me for sure. And I still agreed to do it because I wasn't sure whether the creator of those documents or the creator of those documents would have been Winston, is what I thought, or that he inherited them from someone else, and I couldn't confirm that. So I said, you know what, I'll do this. I'll redo the manual, correct it, did it in like 2 days, no problems, gave it back to him. But then I realized, no, he just wanted me to fix it so he wouldn't have to fix it. So he accused me of plagiarism because I think he thought he'd scare me, but he could have just asked me to do it and I would have done it. I had no problem doing work. At any rate, what I'm trying to get at is a lot of our conversations are very antagonistic, very threatening, very much controlling. Him, the white man, controlling me, the racialized minority female with a disability. And I was so afraid. At every single exchange, I would always be paralyzed with fear first. And then I'd walk away, and I think that I was able to reflect on the situation and garner a little bit of courage and tell myself, you've been through so much. Priya, don't let this hold you back. And then I'd find myself in the same situation the next time we had an encounter. And this cycle repeated itself, like I said, until 2018. When I was supported by my new racialized union representative to go to the dean and request that an investigation be opened or run or completed where they looked into racism and whether it was present and any other kinds and forms of discrimination like that with regards to disability were committed against me by Jim. And I thought this was going to be a smooth run because, you know, there are codes, like there are responsibilities, there's bills around the requirement of an organization to complete an investigation. Well, my dean gave a lot of pushback, and she flat out said to me, well, after she pushed, she said, you know, tried to convince me in a really nice way, and then she got rather threatening, and then she outright just said, you know what, you go through with this investigation, even if you do it externally, because I was moving towards trying to have it done by an external body. She said to me, I'm the final fact finder. So all that information comes back to me, and I make the final decision. And guess what? I am not going to punish any of my faculty. She flat out told me that. She flat out told me, before I'd even started the process, that it was going to end with her not punishing her faculty. She then also said to me, are you sure? This is very one-sided. This very much seems like workplace tension and maybe a little bit of harassment, but discrimination? No. A white dean was speaking to me about my experience with racism when I don't know how she could possibly know what that looks like or feels like when even I, myself, as a racialized minority female with a disability, took some time to onboard to the idea. Like, I mean, I took some time. Like, for a while, I just couldn't even fathom that that's what it was. But I had this white dean now telling me, no, it's not this, after I was very certain it was this. Like, I'm positive, you know? Anyways, I decided to try to push through. My union representative was like, well, there are a lot of processes. We can grieve, you know, trying to create some confidence around the process. Well, I did the intake, and that was, again, putting me through the experience of going through every single documented instance. And let me tell you, I have over 300 pages of emails that ended up forming my case that I filed with the Human Rights Tribunal in early 2019. Why? Because we broke for Christmas, and nothing had gotten done on the investigation. No interim measures were put in place. Nobody was doing anything. And this was despite the fact that when they did the intake, they said there's sufficient grounds to warrant an investigation, but nobody did anything. Nobody seemed concerned whatsoever that I was treated so harshly on a daily basis by my director that it had such an enormous impact on my ability to function, and they just weren't doing anything. When Christmas holidays came around, I witnessed my very close surrogate, almost like a father, but definitely a father figure when I was younger, die right in front of me. He died with me at Sunnybrook Hospital in the ICU. Everybody went home thinking that he was having a good day. I decided to go late because I was busy with my kids during the day, and I show up at about 10:30 at night, and then he goes into cardiac arrest. And then he absolutely fights and fights and fights to try to live. And they try to start his heart up again, and I think he's okay, and then it happens all over again. And we go through this cycle like 6 times until he punctured a lung, and that was it. And that was because they had tried so hard to resuscitate him. And he passed away in front of me. And my uncle identified as a West Indian, so he was racialized minority as well too. But he was a very dark-skinned racialized minority who was often mistook for someone who was black, and experienced a lot of racism, as did much of my mom's family when they came to Canada in the 70s to get their education so they could start to work towards a better life. And I don't know, I think witnessing him pass away, it gave me a kind of strength that I did not think that I had, for sure. And I felt like if I could watch someone so important to me die right in front of me, then I could definitely hold my university accountable for their persistent and pervasive and extensive racism. And so I filed, and I thought, wow, this is going to be great because I'm finally going to get some measure of recognition for what had been done. And it got so much worse. Oh my goodness, did it ever get worse? So from 2019 on, I think that was the worst year in terms of the amount of restrictions. Like, I didn't think you could take something from anybody who really had nothing besides their basic responsibilities as a faculty member, which is a loading of 2 and 2, but he took me off all of the committees. I got removed from the very few things that I was doing in terms of service. Got removed from those because we had a new faculty member, another white faculty member, transfer into our department at that point. That actually went on secondment like 3 months after she came in, but she still got put on all of the committees that I got removed from. So we finally had a faculty sufficient members that could warrant me being taken off, right? Because we had more than 3 members, finally, for the first time. And when she went on secondment, then I got to go back on those committees because she was no longer a part of the school. So, yeah, that's how things worked. So if there wasn't someone white to do the job, then I could do the job as a default. And over the summer, Jim just showed up wherever he wanted or walked up to me whenever he wanted. And by that time, I have now developed a lot of anxiety, was receiving treatment for anxiety disorder. And I would get really uncomfortable, for sure. Extremely uncomfortable, but he was quite comfortable. Whenever he needed whatever he needed, he would come up to me and be around me. And he showed up at a defense for one of my students that was closed, and there was no public blast of it. It was over the summer, and he was very aggressive and extremely rude, and never mind, it was uninvited and not supposed to be there from my standpoint, because I was maintaining separation from him, and I was phoning into meetings, and I was keeping a boundary for myself that I felt very safe and comfortable, or let's put it this way, in that situation, the safest, without being prohibited from being able to do my job. And he went out of his way to be in places that he didn't need to be, like at my students' defense, and he threatened the safety of my students' defense, a black student nonetheless too, who then I had to position myself during his defense to sort of block Jim and Karen, who were not supposed to be there. And I did this all the while staring at John and staring at my student and telling them, like, you know what, just keep going, you're doing an amazing job, you're going to get this. And we got through it, but then I was done, because you know what, everything he did to me, and then I felt like he compromised a student, and that's a whole other level of wrong. That's crossing into territory you should not cross into. So I went to HR, and well, I got blasted. Shockingly, I got blasted by our senior HR consultant, Teresa Sarno. I forgot her name. And every Friday we would go in this back and forth email banter where she'd be threatening me that I have to be around Jim and I have no protections and it doesn't matter. It's my prerogative that I filed with the HRTO. But you know what? You did not get any kind of separations put in place to protect you against Jim. And I said, why not? I'm an employee here too. I'm feeling threatened. I am concerned about my well-being. Why are you not concerned about my well-being? Why, I guess the hidden underlying message is, why is it that a racialized minority female with a disability is not important? Why are you all supporting a white faculty member, a white male faculty member, with such ease? You haven't even seen what is being filed with the HRTO and going through every single stage of the process. Ryerson wasn't successful in throwing it out, so clearly I have a case. Why are you not interested in that? Why don't you want to know what my experience has been? Why don't you want to know how harmed I have been? Why do you not care about the impact this has had on me? I have worked as a dedicated faculty member of Ryerson University from day one to today. I am absolutely, totally and entirely dedicated to my students. There is not one thing I wouldn't do for my students and staff. There's not one thing. Yet I have absolutely no support in my university. And just as a kicker, because we're moving into this period where we're doing the scholar strike, I just leave you with this last thing. I am still with the School of Health Services Management, despite the suggestion that maybe I should change schools. I have been, like I said, with the School of Health Services Management since 2007. I have no intention of leaving. I love my school and I love my students, despite everything that I have been through, which for the long time generated so much shame in me. But I am so proud of myself. I am so proud that I am standing up, that I have stood up, that I am speaking out, that I am setting the kind of expectation or the modeling that I want to see in my girls, because I have 3 racialized female daughters with the same disability. They all have Crohn's. I have 1 son, racialized son with Crohn's disease, and they are all going to go out in the workforce. And if I don't fight for this change, but for the only reason so I can make it better for them, I don't understand how I'm supposed to be, tasked with the title of mom. That's my job. And somehow through that and a very recent experience that we've had this year, which in another video I'll share, gave me a lot of strength to continue this battle and actually escalate it. Today the School of Health Services Management today. So today would be September 5th, 2020. Our School of Health Services Management does not have a director. And has not had a director since July, right? The beginning of July. Partially because our dean was mulling over what to do with our school, as many of you are aware, because she circulated an email indicating that, when she knew that our school's seat in health services management, the director's position, was going to be vacated in January of 2020. But nothing was done. And nothing was done because the only qualified candidate in the department at the time, and still, by qualified, I just mean years of service being with my school, which is 13. That only qualified, or most qualified, I guess you could say, candidate, because Karen, a white female, a faculty member, is retiring. And Kelly McShane, another white female in my department, has now taken on the role of director in marketing, which, I mean, question mark, I'm not sure about that. There's only me. And there's only me that can take the appointment of an interim position. And there's only me that potentially, as far as I know, can apply for the full-time director's role. So guess what? Nothing is getting done. They're just not completing the steps that are required. No one's doing anything. We don't have a chair in my school that I love so much because they don't want to put a racialized female in that position, even in an interim capacity. We went through the requirements set out by our collective agreement that require us to go through a nomination process. We started that in the middle of August. We finished it a week later. We had a nominee, myself. We still don't have a named director. Guys, you are all so educated, all of my fellow faculty members. If this isn't racism, what is this? This is racism, for sure. And I get it, it's difficult. It was so difficult for me, who was experiencing it, to label it and see it for what it is. So I get it. It's probably hard to see it for what it is. But it is what it is. And part of the reason why we can't affect change is because we don't do the first thing that is required for change: problem identification. We don't call it what it is. We don't say those words because they're uncomfortable. It is so uncomfortable. It is so uncomfortable for me as the victim of this to say that I work at a racist institution, that I work under a racist director, that I work under the leadership of a racist dean. Yes, it's so difficult to say. But if you really look at what the definition of racism is, it's the only the biggest, not the only, the whole thing is problematic. But the biggest problem with racism isn't the part where we stereotype so much. It's the part about us engaging in negative behaviors because of those ties that we make to the color of people's skin in the case of racism. That is the problem. So I get it. I get it that I may look different, I may have a different feel to me, and that different feel may be because of my color of my skin. I get that, that is something that often is overcome by people having experience with people of color. And I get that's the part that can be overcome. Only if you want it to, though. That's the key, right? Like, you can only change your cognitive schemas by choice and effort and motivation. And so I'm not saying that, you're a white person, you're a racist. I'm saying that if you do have biases and you do act on those biases and you do hurt people in a very intentional way and block your faculty in a very intentional way, it is what it is, as uncomfortable as it is. And while we all stop to pause on the Scholars Strike, or for the Scholars Strike initiative, that our union, which I'm very happy in a surprised kind of way, that our union has supported this, and that we engage in this on September 9th and 10th, which is great. But while you're pausing, pause and think, is there a faculty member in my school, a racialized faculty member in my school that might not be getting the treatment that I'm getting? Is there a racialized faculty member in my faculty that looks like they're being blocked from opportunities, or like they're staying in the same place year over year over year? Is there a racialized faculty member in Ryerson that seems to be isolated or not nearly as engaged as other of my faculty members in the university? Ask yourself those questions, because as we pause, we're pausing for, our recognition of institutional racism, the presence that it might, the actual recognition that this exists. And why not just go a little further and pause and reflect on whether it exists right here in our house, because your house, my house, our house is shared with people of all races. I mean, some faculty members have said they came specifically to Ryerson University to work. Why? Because they wanted to experience racial diversity. And there's very little racial diversity, but there's still some racial diversity. And I'm just wanting to implore faculty to take the time to think about those racialized faculty, and whether their experience at this university has been one that reflects or imparts or is linked to some of the things that we see with institutional racism. Thank you for listening with me. As you know, I disclosed something that was very personal to me. I really hope that you won't see this as anything other than an absolute attempt on my part to help move this university that I absolutely do love, because the university is more than just the people that I work with. Ryerson represents far more than that. I hope, I really do, and I would really like to be a part of a positive movement of change here at this university. Thank you very much.